Is this on?
Yes.
Okay. Hello. Hello. Thank you so much for coming.
I think everyone enjoyed that as much as I did. I could hear a lot of giggling, which is good. I thought we could start by going back to your time at ECA, if that's all right. So you were in the painting department.
Yes.
So when did your work with film start, and how do you feel that kind of suits what you want to do better than painting, or whether you still dabble?
I think I was in second year when we had a kind of course in the basics of Final Cut, and at that time I was doing stuff with collage and some bits and pieces with sculpture, and I think I always had this problem with painting of trying to put too much into one image. And when I discovered film, discovered specifically green screen, I realised that it was a way that you could kind of combine all these different elements. So an element of collage, an element of sound, narrative. It was almost a space in which you could pack something quite maximal into it without suffering from overcrowding. So yeah, I think that was when I started out, and it was just working with a green screen in my bedroom and very low tech. So
yeah, they're still quite. They've got quite like a painterly aesthetic, and maybe not so much in this film, but in other ones, there's definitely been like a kind of like Renaissance or Baroque sort of vibe going on. I was wondering if you have like an interest in art history and its place in like visual culture, or whether it's just you feel like it can communicate something.
Yeah, I think a lot of the aesthetic in the work is kind of a mixture of different influences, but I look quite a lot at painting as a point of reference for composition, and I think starting out with that idea of thinking about green screen like a kind of moving image collage, it was almost, and at a stage actually when you get to post-production you're working with a still image more than you are a moving image. But yeah, I look quite a lot at people like Bosch, also caricatures, so Hogarth, Robinson. Yeah, I think it's something of a combination of art historical references and lots of other things in there.
A lot of pop culture as well.
Yeah.
Great. So are you alone most of the time when you're making your work?
I was more so to start with, but now I've started working with a slightly larger number of people. So that film, I think, was quite a small crew in terms of production, so maybe about 5 people, and me and one other person in post-production. But the last film I made was slightly bigger crew in production, slightly bigger crew in pre-production, so it kind of depends on budget, how that works. And I still like the feeling that if I really have to, I can make work myself on my own. So
or like a desert island.
Yeah,
yeah. Making art.
Desert island with a green screen.
Yeah. Yeah. So have you always kind of done that thing where you play all of the characters yourself, and is that something you'll always continue, you think?
Yeah, I don't know. It started out, I guess, kind of coming from the idea of performance art and using yourself and using the body, and then I became interested with, I guess, this idea of identity and the kind of slightly absurd, slightly unsettling quality that works like this have, where none of the characters are anything more than a kind of surface value or a kind of surface gloss, and the knowledge that if you were to select an actor, you'd select somebody who maybe looked a bit like the character you wanted them to play. Maybe they had something in common with that character, but it's the fact that none of these characters have much relationship to me that I think there's something odd and something uncomfortable in that, somewhere between maybe they act in some way between a cartoon and a live action or real flesh and blood figures. So, but yeah, I've worked a wee bit with actors, and my most recent film, Feed Me, which is currently showing in Leeds as part of British Art Show and will be in Edinburgh in February for British Art Show. I use actors for the voices in that, but still myself as the characters, so it's kind of a bit more of a halfway house between the two.
Great. Cool. And when you're making these characters, do you have like a narrative to begin with, and then you kind of assemble costumes and visual things to go with them, or do the characters develop as you find visual things that you want to use, or what's the kind of process?
It's kind of a mixture. I usually start with some kind of theme or idea that's going to tie everything together. So with this film I was thinking, or at first this idea of St. George and the Dragon and this being this kind of underlying narrative that I could feed other things into, and kind of broader themes that allow you to research around specific ideas. But usually I have some kind of abstracted script made out of different sources that I then figure out, you know, how am I going to feed characters into this, and usually have some ideas for costumes but not the specific idea of how it's going to play out. So I think the script comes first, strangely, and then the characters come second thoughts.
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions for Rachel? Yeah?
So Disney is known to be quite... So Disney is known to be quite strict when it comes to their copyright. How do you get around that?
Good question.
I don't really is the answer. I mean, I kind of at some level don't really believe in copyright, but I know that I wouldn't stand up in a court of law. So, but I mean, I think there's a degree of kind of risk management to this. Hopefully nobody that works for Disney's in the audience. But I think it's really thinking, you know, it's more to do with would they sue me rather than should I use this or not because I'm breaking copyright. And I think there's a kind of moral thing there where you're taking, if you take something from somebody else without asking them, how do you feel about that? And with Disney, I think I feel okay about that, given that I mean, their whole kind of protocol is to take, well, they take things that have been kind of throughout culture, fairy tales and folk tales, and then they copyright them to the extent that they become slightly untouchable. So I think there's something kind of objectionable in that I don't feel uncomfortable in taking those things again, given that these kind of tales, The Little Mermaid, for example, well, I guess Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast is probably a better example, have been within so many different cultures and have had so many different manifestations that it's only natural that they get reworked and reworked and reworked. So yeah, I feel okay about it, but legally speaking. Yeah.
It's kind of like the whole point of like myths and stories is that we have to kind of recycle them for each generation. Yes. I read that you were interested in the feminist historian Marina Warner a bit, and she's quite well known for like rewriting the stories of women that we think are set, like the Virgin Mary or a lot of like myths and fairy tales. And I wondered if the way that you kind of recycle narratives in your films, would you feel like you're trying to do something similar, or?
Yeah, well I think I'm kind of interested in, I guess from the point of view of national identity and identity more generally, in the stories that we tell about ourselves and also the ways that we retell stories, because I feel like these stories that are kind of time old in the way that Marina Warner talks about, they are not constant and unchanging, they change and adapt to different cultures, and the way that we understand different parts of the story reveals a lot about our kind of, I don't know, cultural hegemony or whatever you'd say. So I think there's something interesting in looking at a culture through the stories it tells about itself and the stories it tells to maybe children in particular is something I look at quite a lot. So, but yeah, Marina Warner's great, and she has this amazing way of being able to take things from fairy tale, from folk tale, and relate them to the contemporary, and pull back and forth constantly between these different reference points.
Yeah, and it's quite unsettling and serious, but also really funny.
Yes,
which is kind of how I feel about your films as well. So, any more questions? Yeah.
I've literally just been studying it in a course in history of art at the uni.
Oh, cool.
And we were discussing sort of themes of like colonialism and things like that are quite like evident in that piece especially. I've always been left really intrigued as to what your actual views on the whole Scotland-England Union are, and how much do you put that like into the film as well, or whether you do just want us all to be sort of left not really knowing.
I guess this work and my other work, The Lion and the Unicorn, which is more specific to Scottish independence, both have a degree of ambiguity to them, which is intentional. And I don't want, I guess in some ways I'm interested in providing some kind of grey area, or I don't want to make work specifically in relation to the referendum. I don't want to make work that is telling you what to do, or is necessarily like completely tied to my own, I don't know. In some ways I don't think what I vote, or if this is what we're talking about, I don't think what I voted in the referendum is important, and I don't want that to be something that taints your understanding of the work. And I think it's more interesting further to be that ambiguity, and I think it's something that art can do, and what I like art can do is that it can talk about politics in a different way to what we're used to, or the kind of conventional rhetoric of politics where there's one person on one side, one person on the other side, and they argue, and you're essentially just defending your position. I feel that there's more space for hypocrisy and contradiction, and there's more space for grey and not just black and white. So that's intentional, I think, that you come out of it not knowing what I think, because I don't think necessarily entirely what I think is important either. So.
I was really struck by you were using like the different kind of dubbed versions of the songs and so on, and it was like amongst all the there's a lot of kind of sort of sudden kind of cuts and non-linear things, and one character, it seemed to come from, I don't know if it derives from kind of your decision to use the sort of alternative language versions of film soundtracks, and how you discovered that, and what you feel about that.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think I guess in the film there's this feeling that, and with most of the characters I create, that they're constantly slipping in and out of other characters, so they're never constant, and there's something a bit uncomfortable in that. And I think with the narrative I wanted, sort of in this idea of St. George and the Dragon, that, who is the dragon? Is the dragon a kind of colonial force, or is the dragon maybe an immigrant wave, or how would you describe, or how would you understand what the dragon is? And that's really up to you. You're not necessarily told what it is. And I think the characters also have that quality to them where you can't quite pin down exactly who they are, and they're, to a certain extent, are nationless, but at the same time they're plastered with flags, and I want there to be that feeling of slipping between different nationalities, slipping between different characters, and also I think that idea of kind of contradiction, your expectation of a character too.
Any other questions?
A question to both of you. Rachel, I wondered if you saw any affinities or had any comments about the films in the rest of the screening in relation to your work, and the same to Daisy, as to whether, watching the screening, you had any thoughts in relation to Rachel's work with other work that was shown.
I was particularly struck by the pinkness in the generator one, which was weirdly seductive. And just how, like, obviously in that context, pinkness was all to do with gender, but in your film, the pinkness is, like the pinkness of the British Empire on the maps, and just how, like, just the colour can hold so much meaning, but we kind of understand in this very non-verbal way, and I don't know.
I guess I kind of think about colour usually as a signifier more than something that kind of is essential. It's usually something that has a very strong meaning that you can then take and translate into something else. So, and I'm quite obsessed with using pink in my work, partly because people don't really take pink seriously, and I like to talk about serious things in pink.
This seems like slightly less kitschy than some of the other films. I've seen like Lolcats or something.
I think there's still I look quite a lot at children's television and something of that language, both in terms of narrative and in terms of the kind of worlds of children's television. And I think there's still some, well, obviously a lot of it's taken from children's films, and something of that kind of oversimplification and slightly saccharine worldview is still there, if we're talking in the kind of saccharine pink.
But also it's like the repetition as well, because like when you're a child you just watch those things like over and over and over again, so kind of seeing them being lip synced and in the same sort of like palette is just really familiar and kind of sweet in a way.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to have, and I feel like it is very generation specific, in that these are films that I grew up with, and maybe other people in my age in the audience grew up with them too. So they're intentionally things that I want you to just recognise instantly. But that is to a certain extent generation specific, what age your kids were as well. But
were there any other films that particularly resonate with you?
I thought they were fantastic. It was such a nice screening, and really diverse, but all connected as well. I love the first film, the Francesca Fini one with the 3D. It was amazing and bizarre, and just like quite overwhelming. There were so many ideas. And yeah, similarly with Emma Finn, that weird kind of, I don't know, something about the atmosphere, that silence was really took you into this other world that you couldn't quite put your finger on. And I really like the manufacturing Britishness, especially with the pot of tea being poured. Well, I was talking about that.
Yeah, I was talking about that one in the text, and it seems to be kind of be like the opposite of aesthetics, because it's so like minimalist and like pared down, but kind of gives across some of the same messages. I thought that artist did a TED talk, weirdly enough, the woman who made that video, which is really good if you want to watch it. But that was quite like a long film, that one. Some of it, you've done like music videos before and shorter things, and is it just dependent on like the budget or what kind of project it is, or do you want to make longer films? Or
yeah, I think it kind of depends on. I've been lucky in that since I graduated I've been asked to do a number of different things, which has been fun, and I really like doing music videos. There's a kind of strictness to it, in that you're given a piece of music and it's a certain length and you've got to stick to it, but there's also a complete freedom that there's no visuals attached to that already, so you can completely invent a language for it. And yeah, I guess I've done stuff that's more comedic, and this work was made for Glasgow Film Festival in 2013-14. And I made it with a kind of cinema screen in mind and surround sound, and also referenced a lot of films and the kind of language of film in it, but other works I've made more for a gallery kind of space. So I think it's kind of totally to do with content.
And is cinema something, do you like this setup, or do you kind of prefer it to be in a gallery, or just work with what you've got?
I really like cinema, in that you've kind of got people sat down. They can't leave. No, they can't leave. But I think with a gallery, it's different. You can show short things in a gallery in the way that it's hard to in a cinema, unless it's part of another programme. And I've also worked with kind of split screen and multiple screen, which you can't do in a conventional cinema setup. So I think there's possibilities in both, and I like the idea of also being able to show certain works in both settings too.
Different audiences.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. I think there's things that film audiences notice that art audiences don't. I mean, that's kind of nonsense because there's so much overlap.
I think it depends on the kind of seating as well that you have in galleries.
True, I know. So you have like a popcorn container.
Does anyone have any questions? Cool. Okay. I was just wondering if you have scenes that don't make it into films, like if you have like outtakes or like directors.
Not so much. I think usually I'm on a really tight budget, so you just like film exactly what you need. There's been scenes I forgot to shoot. I actually did forget to shoot a scene for this, but I think it's okay without it.
What happened in the scene?
It was just another one of the statues speaking that
Okay.
I forgot to shoot.
It's kind of like you kind of had like a sneak preview of it, kind of, by you telling us. And I wanted to ask, because I write about it in the text, but the scene where he's drawing the line
Oh, yes,
on the map,
yes.
and is that a reference to someone allegedly jogging Winston Churchill's arm
Yeah,
when he was...
I read about that ages ago. And
Yeah.
yeah.
So, okay, yeah. And it's just weird because we don't usually encounter those things outside of like documentaries or kind of like a very like serious historical way, and I wondered if you thought that through fiction it's kind of, we need to have these kind of alternative ways of seeing them.
Yeah. Well, I think the way that we understand who we are in terms of national identity is as much to do with history as it is to do with fiction. And there's some kind of like semi-fictional kind of midway point as well that you rest on. And I think that's very true of Scottish identity. And I think it's talked about a lot, this idea of kind of Walter Scott creating Scottish identity and the influence of fiction on who we think we are and what we think we are. And I think that's true of British identity in the way the stories we've told about ourselves, the official stories that are told about the British Empire and how we kind of seek to narrativize that. So I think there is a strong degree of fiction to what is real and who we think we are.
Do you find that you get people reading into your work what they want to see? Like if you get kind of Scottish nationalists coming up and being like, you've made propaganda for us, or I guess there's room for like all interpretations.
Yeah. Well, I've had, which I think is quite fun, when, especially with the piece I made, Line of the Unicorn, which was about, more specifically about the referendum. I had people coming up to me and saying, oh, it's great to see that you're a unionist, it's great to see that you're making work about, and then other people have been like, great to see that you're on board with the SNP. You just feel like...
Have you ever been commissioned by a political party? No. Could happen. Okay, we've probably got time for one more question. Anyone? Last chance? Yeah?
Sorry, it's a slightly more technical thing, and I apologise if it's perhaps a little limited in... That again. It's slightly more technical of a question. I apologise if it's slightly limited in its way of thinking, but when you're making a film, is there a point in the process where the film in your head is made and you just need to continue producing it, or is it something where you're still, playing with it in a fundamental way, all the way up until pretty much you do the final render, so to speak?
Yeah, there probably is. I think before I shoot it, especially working with found footage, I've already pretty much edited it, so you kind of know the length and you know exactly what you're going to shoot before you shoot. So after that, the things that can change are more the specifics of acting and the specifics of costume, and then the backgrounds, which I think is quite fun because you have, with green screen, you've got the edit, you've got the acting, you've got the dialogue, but then the whole kind of atmosphere and the backgrounds and everything can still be changed very easily. So there's definitely a point where the edit is pretty much kind of locked off before the film is even shot. So yeah.
I wondered, can you tell the Billy Connolly thing? Was that secret?
Oh yes, I probably can. Yeah. Great. I don't think it is secret, but I just don't tell anybody. So I'm working on a project for the BBC, which I was shooting earlier this week, but it's a project where they're celebrating 75th birthday, which strangely enough he has the same birthday as me, which is next November, and BBC are doing a commission where they're commissioning 3 artists to make a mural of Billy Connolly to celebrate his life. So I'm doing a kind of digitally printed mural of him, and the other two artists in a completely bizarre fashion are Jack Vetriano and John Byrne. So it's going to be like quite an odd program. But I met him on Wednesday, and he's really nice, and it was really one of the most surreal days of my life, where I got him dressed up and painted him blue. I took a photograph of him in front of a green screen. So yeah, can't wait to see it. I hope I'm allowed to tell you this.
Is that now?
Yeah.
Is that us? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.